Good morning, Year 5. I hope you're all doing great, guys. So, today is going to be our last science session before the spring break. I know that you have some plans for it. I just hope you guys all are safe, and I hope you have a lovely vacation. Now let's start with our lesson today. So today we're going to talk about objects orbiting the sun, and we're going to discuss the word orbit. But before this, we are going to correct your homework, page 54, and then we are going to learn about some of the objects that orbits the sun, such as the comets and asteroids and the dwarf planets too. And we are going to watch some lovely videos about them. Then we're going to do a very small classwork in page 56. Now let's start. We are going to start with worksheet number 1, which was your homework, page 54. The rotating Earth. Read the statements below. Tick to show if each statement is true or false. Then correct the false statements. Number 1 says the Earth takes 24 hours to make a rotation around the Sun. So it doesn't take 24 hours to make a rotation around the sun. It takes 24 hours to make a rotation around its own axis. So this statement is false, and the correction is to make a rotation around its axis. You also can change 24 hours and write 365 days to make a rotation around the sun as you like. Now question number 2 says the Earth rotates on its own axis. So this is a true statement. Number 3, the sun moves around the Earth. That doesn't make sense because the Earth is way too smaller for the sun to be revolving around it. So this is a false statement, and it's the other way around. The Earth moves around the sun. Number 4 says the Earth is flat. I think it's very obvious that the Earth is not flat. So this is a false statement, and the correction is that the Earth is roughly a sphere. Number 5, we have day and night on Earth because of the Earth rotation on its own axis. Yes, every 24 hours. So this is a true statement. Now let's start with our lesson, and let's start with a question about the word orbit. What does orbit mean? Orbits mean the orbit mean the pathway an object takes to revolve around another object. So orbiting means to revolve around an object in a certain pathway. So this path that any object takes in order to revolve around another object is called an orbit. So there are other objects other than the planets that orbit the sun, such as what? Such as the comets and the asteroids. Now let's talk about each one of them. Now let's start with the asteroids, guys. And the asteroids are actually small rocky bodies that float in the space. They are not as big as the planets to be considered a planet. They are way too small to be a planet, but they are actually made of the same material, which is rocks and minerals. They are not found roaming around in the space in just haphazardly. No, they are found in a place, a specific area between the inner planets and the outer bigger planets. This area where the asteroids are found is called the asteroids belt. And the inner planets, as you can see, are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. The outer bigger planets are Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune and Uranus. So the asteroid belts are like a barrier, or like something that splits both types of planets, splits them up, as you can see in this place. And this is how they look like. They look like a very large group of rocks. As you can see, they are very well organized, and they all revolve around the sun, just like the other planets. Now, the comets are other types of bodies that you will find orbiting the sun. They are also smaller bodies than the planets, and they are mainly made of ice and dust. They are very, very well known by their white, shiny tail, and this tail is made of ice particles and dusts. When they come closer to the sun, because as I told you, they are made of ice and dust, when they are revolving around the sun and they come closer to the sun, the ice inside this ball starts to melt, and while it's moving, the melting ice starts to follow up the main ball, and that what causes the distinct white shiny tail. The most famous comet that we learned about is Halley's Comet, and Halley's Comet have a certain pathway around the sun, and it can be seen from the Earth, where it comes closer to the Earth every 75 years, and the last time it was seen, it was in year 86. So now let's watch a little video about both asteroids and comets.
Who's ready to explore more space? If you've joined Squeaks and me here recently, then you already know about the biggest object in the solar system, which is made up of the Sun, the Earth, and 7 other planets. The 4 planets that are closest to the Sun, including Earth, are smaller, solid, rocky worlds. Those are called the rocky planets. And the 4 planets farther away from the Sun are much bigger. They are made mostly of gases. Those are the gas giants. But there's a lot more in our solar system than just those 8 planets. There are also things like comets and asteroids. They're a lot smaller, but they're just as interesting. And they both have one main thing in common. They're basically flying space rocks. Let's talk about comets first. The word comet comes from the Greek word for hairy, because some astronomers once referred to comets as hairy stars. But why? A comet isn't a star at all, and it doesn't have hair. It's really a chunk of ice, dust, and rock. Think of it as like a big dirty snowball in orbit around the sun. As a comet gets closer to the sun, its frozen gases and dust begin to warm up and thaw out. The gas and dust start to break apart and stream behind the comet, making it look like it has, well, a big hairy tail. Our solar system's most famous comet is probably the one known as Halley's Comet. It's named after English astronomer Edmund Halley, who figured out what it really was. He had read reports about 3 comets that were seen flying by the Earth many years apart. But Halley figured out that these 3 comets were actually the same comet, flying past us over and over again. Based on when the comet had passed by the Earth in the past, he predicted when it would come by again. And he was right. Halley's Comet has been spotted from Earth every 75 years or so. The last time it came close was 1986, meaning we'll probably see it again in 2061. How old will you be then? Now, comets have really big orbits and spend a lot of their time in the far outer reaches of our solar system. So let's talk about rocks that come a little closer to the Earth. Asteroids. Most asteroids are found between the planets Mars and Jupiter in an area called the asteroid belt. There are a lot of asteroids cruising around in the asteroid belt, but most of them are spaced really, really far apart. Asteroids sort of look like comets, but they don't have fuzzy outlines or tails. Actually, they look a lot more like tiny planets. In fact, one famous asteroid named Ida even has its own moon, called Dactyl. Asteroids are basically broken pieces of unfinished planets, left over from the time when the solar system first formed. They're mostly big chunks of rock with metals in them too. And as they fly around out there in the asteroid belt, they often crash into each other. Sometimes an asteroid will get bumped clear out of the asteroid belt. They can even get knocked in our direction. If a flying space rock enters the Earth's atmosphere, which is what we call the layer of gases that surround our planet, it'll start to burn up. Then it's called a meteor, a really fast streak of light that flies through the sky. You might have heard this called a shooting star, but now you know it's not a star at all. Most meteors burn up completely before they reach the surface of the Earth, but if a hunk of rock is big enough, then some of it might still be left by the time it reaches the ground. What happens if one of these flying space rocks hits our planet? If that happens, then it's called a meteorite. Most meteorites are still pretty small. You could probably hold an average-sized meteorite in your hand. But very rarely, Earth can get hit by a rock that's pretty big. In fact, most scientists think that a really big meteorite that hit the Earth millions of years ago led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. But don't worry, most flying space rocks stay where they are, in space. Now who wants to go in the backyard and watch for meteors? Me too! See you next time for more SciShow Kids, and remember, if you have a question for any of us here at the Fort, let us know by leaving a comment below or emailing us at kids@thescishow.com.
Now let's talk about another type of objects that revolve around the sun, the dwarf planets. They are mainly planets, but they are much smaller than planets, and that's why they call it a dwarf planet. They are just like planets, as I told you, in their shape and structure. They are a sphere, and they are mainly made of rocks. The most famous dwarf planet is Pluto. As you know, it was a part of the planets in the solar system, but in 2006 they just kicked it out of the solar system, but it's still a part of the solar system. It's just not a planet, a main planet anymore. That's because all of the planets that revolve around the sun has a certain pathway and revolves around the sun in certain times. For example, in case of Earth, it revolves around the sun every 365 days. But in case of Pluto, the scientists could not figure out a specific time that Pluto could complete a complete revolution around the sun. And it doesn't have a distinct pathway that it moves in. And you will know in the next video, guys, that this is due to their small size. They get hit easily by any of the space objects flying around in space, and this because they are small, they sometimes deviate from the main pathway that they are moving around the sun in. The most famous dwarf planets, as I told you, except Pluto, are Eris, Ceres, Haumea, and Makemake. The closest to us is Ceres, and it's the smaller among all of the dwarf planets. Makemake has a very characteristic color. It has a little pinkish color because it has some chemical reactions that happening on its surface, which causes this color. Now let's watch the next video about dwarf planets.
We've had a great time exploring the solar system with you so far, and we're not done yet. If you've been joining us for the past few weeks, then you've gotten to meet all 8 of the planets, the 4 rocky planets and the 4 gas giants. And we've also explored some of the smaller objects that are flying around the solar system, like asteroids and comets. But there's so much more to explore, including some things that, when it comes to their size, are kind of in between. They're smaller than planets, but they're bigger than asteroids. Scientists call them the dwarf planets. Dwarf planets are actually a lot like regular planets. They all have basically a round shape, and they travel in a path around the sun. But unlike regular planets, dwarf planets are much smaller, and their trip around the sun is probably a lot bumpier. That's because while planets like Earth or Jupiter have a clear path around the sun, dwarf planets' paths are full of lots of other stuff, like asteroids. Think of orbits around the sun as being like lanes on a highway. Regular planets have a lane pretty much all to themselves, but dwarf planets are always sharing their lanes with lots of other things that are moving around with them. So that's what makes a dwarf planet different from a regular planet: its size and the amount of stuff that's around it. Even though dwarf planets are smaller than regular planets, they're just as exciting to learn about. Let's check out some of these dwarf planets up close. Squeaks, grab the telescope. So far, astronomers have named 5 dwarf planets, most of which are very far from Earth. All but one of them are in an icy area way past Neptune called the Kuiper Belt. First up is Pluto. Pluto, located just beyond Neptune, is probably the most famous of the dwarf planets. That's because it was the first object way out there that was discovered, and for a long time it was actually considered to be a regular planet. But then, scientists discovered lots of other planet-like things farther out in the solar system than Pluto, and they were orbiting the sun too. Some of these objects were even a little bigger than Pluto, and they all had a bunch of other space rocks cluttering up their orbits. So, scientists realized that Pluto was just one of many objects out there, and they decided that Pluto really wasn't a planet like Venus or Mercury, but instead, it was a dwarf planet. But Pluto is still super interesting. Because it's so far from the sun, it's one of the coldest places in the solar system. Temperatures can dip as low as 225 degrees below zero. So you'll definitely need your mittens if you go to Pluto. Next up is Haumea. Because Haumea spins really fast, a single day on this dwarf planet is also really fast. Just 4 hours. Astronomers think Haumea collided with another large object a long time ago. A crash like that might explain why it spins so fast, and also why it has a more oval shape than the other dwarf planets. Moving on to Makemake. Because this dwarf planet was discovered around Easter time, astronomers once nicknamed it Easter Bunny. Like the other dwarf planets we've seen, Makemake is also super cold. It's very bright too, because there's lots of shiny ice on it, and thanks to some of the chemicals on its surface, it actually looks kind of pink. Look how pretty it is. Next up is Eris. Eris is the biggest dwarf planet in the solar system. It's just a little bit bigger than Pluto, and it even has its own tiny moon. And our last dwarf planet is a little closer to home, Ceres. Ceres is the closest dwarf planet to the Sun, located in the asteroid belt, that big band of space rocks flying around between Mars and Jupiter. In addition to being closer to us than the rest of the dwarf planets, Ceres is also the smallest of them. It's so small that scientists consider it to be both a dwarf planet and a really big asteroid. The coolest thing about Ceres is that it's also the first dwarf planet to be visited by a spacecraft. The spacecraft, called Dawn, didn't have any astronauts on it. It was more like a robot that took a lot of measurements and amazing pictures, which has given us the closest look we've gotten at a dwarf planet yet. Scientists hope that by studying Ceres, they'll be able to learn more about all of the dwarf planets. And even though they've only named 5 dwarf planets so far, experts think that they'll soon find hundreds more of them in our solar system. So Squeaks and I might have many more worlds to explore with you in the years to come, and I can't wait. And if you have a question or just something that you'd like to learn more about, let us know by leaving a comment or emailing us at kids@thescishow.com. See you next time, guys.
So now let's do some classwork at just one page of classwork, and it's a very easy one. So the worksheet name is Sun Tracks. And now background knowledge first. You know that on any single day the sun will rise and set. However, it is Earth that is moving. It takes 24 hours for Earth to make a complete rotation on its axis as it moves. The sun appears to change its position in the sky. The sun appears to rise in the east when the part of Earth you are on is turning towards the sun, and appears to set in the west when your hometown is turning away from the sun. In addition to rotation on its axis, Earth is also revolving around the sun. It takes an average of 365 days or 1 year to make one complete orbit around the sun. Now, the science activity that we're going to do, there is a picture right here. The picture shows the sun at 3 times during one summer day. First, it was in position A, then it moved to position B, then it moved to position C. The question says which side of the picture is the east. I think it's very obvious. They said that the first position the sun was in was position A. So this means that the east is at position A. So it's a little bit to the left. The next is what time is it at position B? It's right in the middle of the sky, up high in the sky. So this is probably noon or 12 p.m. The last question says what will soon happen at position C? I think this is where the place that we live in is turning away from the sun, and this will cause the sun to set. So sunset will happen at position C. That's it for today, guys. I hope it was a lovely session. I had fun watching the videos and talking to you more about the objects in the sun. I hope you have a lovely a weekend and a lovely spring break, and I will be seeing you after the break. I hope I see you well, and happy Ramadan to all of you guys, and see you soon. Bye bye.